Randy Couture. In 2002, Randy Couture loses his UFC heavyweight title to Rico Rodriguez and calls it a career at age 39. Most people figured the man had earned his AARP card and a recliner. But in true, you can't fire me, I quit fashion, he returns 5 years later at UFC 68 in Columbus to fight 6'8" Tim Sylvia, a man who looks like a forklift in MMA gloves. Couture, giving up 40 pounds and a decade of youth, drops Sylvia with the very first punch of the fight and proceeds to dominate him for 25 straight minutes. The crowd loses its mind as Sylvia spends 5 rounds getting wrestled by a guy who could have been his high school PE teacher. Judges score it unanimously for Couture, who at 43 becomes the oldest champion in UFC history and instantly rebrands Dad's Strength as a legitimate training style. He grins afterward and says, "Not bad for an old man," while Sylvia quietly reconsiders his life choices. The comeback cements Couture as living proof that midlife crises can be productive, if they happen inside a cage. Georges St-Pierre. In 2013, Georges St-Pierre vacates his welterweight title after 9 defenses, saying he's burnt out, which in GSP terms means he's still in perfect shape, but tired of everyone asking about aliens and judging conspiracies. He disappears for 4 years, then shows up at UFC 217 in Madison Square Garden, looking like he spent the entire hiatus doing push-ups and meditating on perfection. Now fighting at middleweight for the first time, he takes on Michael Bisping, who's got one good eye, a big mouth, and the cardio of a man powered by spite. GSP drops him with a crisp left hook in round 3, chokes him unconscious, and instantly becomes the 4th fighter in history to win belts in 2 weight classes. The post-fight moment is pure GSP, polite handshake, zero trash talk, and the vibe of a guy who just beat someone at chess instead of combat. He later reveals he was battling ulcerative colitis the whole time, because of course GSP finds a way to make even digestive issues sound heroic. A few months later, he vacates the title again, proving his record for perfection extends to quitting at exactly the right time. Matt Brown. Matt Brown's UFC career starts like a bad sitcom, cut twice, losing records, and a reputation for being entertaining but cursed. By 2012, he's riding a 3-fight skid, the kind of streak that usually ends with a polite "best of luck in your future endeavors" email from Dana White. Instead, Brown comes back swinging, literally, and rattles off 7 straight wins, finishing Jordan Mein, Eric Silva, and Tim Means in a stretch that turns him from gatekeeper to guaranteed fight of the night. His bonuses pile up, 5 in a row, like overdue paychecks, and fans start showing up just to watch the chaos. He fights with a mix of violence and durability that makes doctors nervous and commentators thrilled. Asked how he keeps doing it, Brown simply says, "I'm too stubborn to die," which is either terrifying or motivational, depending on your morning coffee. His run redefines the mid-2010s welterweight scene, setting the stage for another blue-collar comeback story, Robbie Lawler's road from journeyman to champion. Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler gets cut from the UFC in 2004 after a string of wild slugfests that make highlight reels but not win bonuses. For nearly a decade, he bounces around Elite XC and Strikeforce, knocking people out, getting knocked out, and collecting enough scar tissue to qualify as a leather product. Then in 2013, he strolls back into the UFC like he just forgot his wallet, drops to welterweight, and starts wrecking people. He smokes Josh Koscheck, goes to war with Rory MacDonald in a fight that looks like a horror movie with gloves, and wins the welterweight title in 2014 by outlasting Johnny Hendricks over 5 brutal rounds. Every defense is pure chaos. 5 rounds of mutual brain damage followed by hugs and respect. Asked about his strategy, Lawler just shrugs and says he likes to punch people in the face, which, to be fair, is working great. He finally loses the belt to Tyron Woodley in 2016, but by then his comeback is MMA folklore. The man who turned getting punched a lot into a career renaissance. Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping debuts in the UFC in 2006 after winning the Ultimate Fighter and proceeds to spend the next decade as the guy who always just misses the big one. He racks up over 20 UFC fights, loses to Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, and Luke Rockhold, and becomes the poster child for almost. Then in June 2016, when Chris Weidman drops out at UFC 199 on short notice, Bisping steps in to fight Rockhold again, this time with only 17 days' notice and one working eye. He proceeds to flatten Rockhold in the first round with a left hook heard around the world, winning the middleweight title a full decade after his debut. The crowd goes ballistic, while Bisping celebrates like a man who just won an argument that lasted 10 years. He later admits he fought most of his career basically half-blind, which somehow makes the win both heroic and medically concerning. He retires in 2018, reveals the glass eye on his podcast, and cements his legacy as the toughest, funniest, and most stubborn man ever to win a UFC belt. Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz is basically the poster boy for built different, mostly because half of him has been rebuilt. Between 2012 and 2014, he tears both ACLs, injures his groin, and spends more time with doctors than training partners, forcing the UFC to strip his bantamweight title. Most fighters would have retired or opened a gym called What's Left of Me MMA, but not Cruz. He returns at UFC 178, demolishes Takeya Mizugaki in 61 seconds, and looks so sharp that fans start checking if he was secretly sparring in physical therapy. Then, like a cruel sequel nobody asked for, he blows out his ACL again, his third in 4 years, turning his knees into a full-time orthopedic project. 2 years later, he comes back again, beats TJ Dillashaw by split decision after 1,562 days off, and reclaims his belt like nothing happened. In the post-fight interview, Cruz shrugs and says, "You can break me down, but I rebuild," which sounds inspirational until you realize he's speaking literally. His story proves you can't count him out, unless you're his ligaments, in which case it's 2 rounds to 0. Frank Mir. In 2004, Frank Mir wins the UFC heavyweight title, then immediately loses a fight with a moving vehicle. A motorcycle accident breaks his femur, damages the nerves in his leg, and leaves doctors wondering if he'll ever walk normally again, let alone choke out 260-pound men for money. The UFC strips him of the belt after a 21-month layoff, and for a while it looks like his career might end with a pity applause instead of a comeback. But Mir being Mir, he returns in 2006, rebuilds himself, and 2 years later, at UFC 81, submits Brock Lesnar, a literal WWE monster, with a knee bar so sudden that Lesnar's face cycles through all 5 stages of grief in 5 seconds. From there, Mir gets meaner. He knocks out Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira in one fight, breaks his arm in the rematch, and smiles about it like a guy who just solved a math problem. He once joked he's the only man who breaks limbs for a living and still says "sir" after. By the time he's done, he's fought through injuries, eras, and egos, proving the only thing harder to finish than Frank Mir's career is Frank Mir himself. Anderson Silva. At UFC 168 in December 2013, Anderson Silva, the middleweight GOAT with 16 straight UFC wins, throws a leg kick that snaps in half on Chris Weidman's shin. The sound is awful, the replay is worse, and the entire arena collectively forgets how to breathe. After 13 months of recovery, Silva returns at UFC 183 to fight Nick Diaz, a man who spends half the bout lying down and taunting him. Silva wins by unanimous decision, though it's later overturned after a failed drug test for anabolic steroids, because apparently the universe decided one leg break wasn't enough humiliation for the Spider. Still, Silva keeps fighting until 2020, putting on highlight reel moments even in defeat and mentoring an entire generation of strikers, including Israel Adesanya, who literally calls him sensei. At 45, Silva finally transitions to boxing, where he somehow looks happier punching YouTubers than he did defending belts. Miesha Tate. Miesha Tate retires in 2016 after back-to-back losses to Amanda Nunes and Raquel Pennington, telling everyone she's done fighting and ready to focus on family and front office work. She becomes a vice president at One Championship, trades gloves for business suits, and looks perfectly happy not getting punched in the face for a living. Then 5 years later, at UFC Vegas 31 in July 2021, she wakes up one morning and decides spreadsheets are boring. Tate returns to the octagon against Marion Renault, dominates from start to finish, and finishes her with ground and pound in round 3, the first female fighter in UFC history to retire and then win a fight 5 years later. The performance looks like vintage Cupcake, only this time with mom's strength added to the arsenal. Asked why she came back, Tate said she just missed the grind, which is fighter code for normal jobs suck. Still competing at 37, she proves that even after retirement, a real fighter never truly clocks out, just takes an extended lunch break. Charles Oliveira. For years, Charles Oliveira was that guy hardcore fans loved, but nobody could quite figure out. Dangerous on the ground, slick on the feet, but somehow always one fight away from a meltdown. With an early UFC record of 10-8-1, he looked less like a future champion and more like a man cursed by Brazilian Wi-Fi. Then around 2018, something flips. Oliveira polishes his striking, upgrades his confidence, and suddenly goes on a 9-fight win streak that slices through names like Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler, and Dustin Poirier. At UFC 262, he stops Chandler in the second round to win the lightweight belt, becoming the UFC's first jiu-jitsu wizard to run the division since BJ Penn. He now holds the all-time record for most finishes in UFC history, 19, which basically means if you share a cage with him, you're statistically doomed. Asked what changed, Oliveira said, "They doubted me. Now they can't stop me," which sounds humble until you realize it's terrifyingly accurate. From that submission guy to that champion with bleach blonde hair who submits everyone, Oliveira's glow-up is one of the greatest career turnarounds the UFC's ever seen. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.